Hello, welcome to this live stream after the Champions League final, in which PSG, what's the correct adjective here? Hammered, destroyed, thumped, comprehensively beat Inter Milan 5-0, which we're about to find out, if you didn't know already, was the most dominant scoreline in the entire, not just the Champions League era, in the entire history of the European Cup. In 1960, I believe, Real Madrid beat Frankfurt 7-4, but never before has there been 5 goals differential between two teams. So I'm joined by Mark Carey of The Athletic.
Hello.
Hello. And John Mackenzie, also, we're all of The Athletic here. Hello. John, let me start with you, with the simple question. As I just said, it was the most dominant scoreline ever. It makes me feel as though the first question I should start the show with is, did Inter ever have a chance? Because it really didn't seem like it from the game.
Yeah, we were talking about this before we went live, and I was saying that it's felt since probably about January that it's been PSG's Champions League to an extent. They've had to beat a lot of teams along the way. Mark obviously jumped straight in and said, well, there were some tricky games along the way, but I think even some of those, like for example the game against Liverpool where it was quite narrow on scoreline, I think if you look at the underlying numbers, it was a bit more in PSG's favour, if I remember. But it's been kind of interesting because at the beginning of the Champions League run, you might have remembered, there was the game against Arsenal that Arsenal fans love to remind us of, where PSG lost to Arsenal and didn't really look up to much at all. Since they've hit January, they've made a few changes. They've taken Ousmane Dembele, made him into a striker, and since that kind of period, they've just looked absolutely scintillating, and they've become, I think, by default, a lot of people's favourite teams. I think maybe Barcelona vying for that title as well. But yeah, they've been absolutely fantastic. So it's felt, going in the run-up to this, that this is PSG's trophy to lose. But they very much won it today, I think.
They definitely did.
They definitely did win it.
Just to confirm, they did win it.
And they won it more than, as you say, most teams usually win it, right? If you win by a 5-goal differential, you.
They just won it the once, John. That was.
They won it once, but they won it 5 times more than a lot of. I think it's in the last six finals have been 1-goal differentials.
It's also now that the last 7 finals where only one team has scored any goals. We'll chat about that a little bit later as well.
Yeah, but I think we've got hindsight bias here, right? We're going into this knowing that the result was 5-0. It's very easy to then read PSG into that scoreline and say, well, this was inevitable. But I think the Inter coming into this as well, a lot of people thought that they could be the underdogs here. I know you, Mark, you were saying that they're sort of, these two teams are very sort of different teams, right? And it was going to be what do you like to say? Styles
make fights. I was quite pleased that this final itself was a clashing of maybe ideologies as much as anything. Of course, the age coming into that, which I'm sure we'll come on to as well. But I like that it wasn't just two teams trying to play exactly the same way. It was one trying to outdo the other sort of tactically with a different approach. But I do think just the final thing on PSG as well is that they have had moments throughout the campaign that have been kind of hinged moments, some fantastic saves from Donnarumma throughout the knockout stages especially. They had to beat Liverpool on penalties, which of course is a bit of a lottery as well. So yes, I do think, not that you've asked the question, but I do think they are deserving winners of the Champions League this year, but there have been kind of moments which you need in knockout football in general to win. But I think that this, of all the games that they've had, for all their dominance across both legs in a lot of the knockout games, this has, obviously comfortably in the scoreline, but in the performance as well, been the most dominant.
Well, your predictive model, Mark Carey's trademark predictive model, it said that PSG were likely to win. It did say 2-1, bit wrong. Science doesn't always get right. Science. I think PSG in your model had a 55% chance likelihood of winning. Inter only had 27%, and the rest in draw. I suppose what you're saying though is that they won in such incredible fashion this evening that it's maybe a bit easy to get carried away with how good they were retrospectively.
Yeah, and not necessarily. Yeah, I think you said about hindsight bias, like a bit of rose-tinted glasses that this game was representative of the whole of the second half of the campaign. To your point, but it's just making the point that there was occasions where they didn't always have it their own way. I think that certain periods in the Arsenal game, Aston Villa in sort of either side of half time, there was a period. The Liverpool, their home leg against Liverpool completely sucker punched them. They were fantastic in their performance there, if not the scoreline.
Yeah.
But the first half an hour of the Liverpool game at Anfield, Liverpool probably maybe could have been 2-0 up at that point as well. And PSG grew into the game, they hung on, they were far stronger of the two teams in extra time, and ultimately deserved to go through, with the penalties being a bit of a lottery. So I still think the conclusion is the same. They should have won the league, the Champions League, but the means by which they did it wasn't maybe as comprehensive as maybe the narrative might be.
Sure.
Say.
I think we'll get on to talk about this in a bit more detail, but I think it's also worth saying that they have had to hang on in games. And I think in the past, PSG have been that team that have been held up with, they've got all of this incredible talent, but they don't do enough with that out of possession. So for all of the good things they do with the ball, without the ball, they can often lose that. And I think what we've seen from this Champions League edition is that PSG have actually done the hard work off the ball as well. They've been really impressive without the ball. So I think that's a really interesting angle to this too.
Sorry, I had a fizzy drink during the game. You stopped talking just as I was expelling some gas.
Do you want me to? I think
it's live. Don't worry. When we're live, gas happens inside of people. It's all natural, John. Now listen, Ahmed Huda in the chat has the same question I was about to ask you. Ahmed asks a question for you guys. Where did Inter go wrong? It's a good question because I was just about to come to you, Mark, and say you told me this earlier while we were watching the game. Before tonight, Inter had only been in a losing game state, so behind in a game, for a cumulative 16 minutes. In the tournament. I think 12 minutes was the first goal this evening, and they were obviously behind for the rest of the for the evening.
They were more behind as it went on as well. Yes.
and then PSG won it 5 times.
Yeah,
it's incredible. Could this be a case of we haven't really seen them in a negative game state that much, and maybe they're just a bit rubbish when they are in one?
Yeah, a bit rubbish. I'm reluctant to say, given the quality of them, but I do think that it does. The style that they play with does lend itself to being in at least a drawing or a winning game state, because they're able to sit behind the ball and be in that 5-3-2 and be able to spring forward when they need to. We saw it from 15 minutes in, when they do have to chase the game, which they're not used to. In the Champions League, that's 1% of the total time they've been in a losing game state. In Serie A as well, it was only been 8% across the whole of the Italian league, which is the lowest as well. They're not used to being in that position. When they do have to chase the game, the athleticism, which we'll come on to, which they just didn't have in comparison to PSG, you could argue whether they have it at all because of the age of their squad. When they have to push those wing backs high in more of a desperate state, shall we say, slightly more desperate than normal, then they can get picked off on the transition, on the counter attack. So that's what happened on occasion tonight, and it's just not built for that. But then if they are in a winning game state, that compact 5-3-2 that they can shuffle either side, we saw it so well in multiple games, but especially in the Barcelona semi-final, able to just shepherd Barca and just force them to circulate the ball. They're far more adept at being in that, and it also allows them to conserve their energy because they are a bunch of old lads.
Yeah, I mean, there was the huge differential between the ages of the average ages of the team, wasn't there? Yeah. Now, John, let's have a look at some of the goals, because I feel like what Mark just talked us through, we're about to see in reality. Where do you want to? Oh, I've got the age chart.
The age chart here, just to show that Inter were the oldest team in the Champions League.
I do think it's worth noting as well, like I said this in the preview for this game, that you can naturally just adjust your narrative accordingly depending on the outcome of the game. Had Inter won and maybe gone up ahead early and been able to sit in that 5-3-2 and then had a bit more of a stronger defensive performance, we would have said, well, it's down to Inter's battle-hardened, experienced side, and age is everything in this game. As PSG have won, it's now that it's their youthful experience, it's their athleticism, and it's their joie de vivre. Yes, I know French words. So I do think you can, as I say, adjust the narrative accordingly.
I mean, there's people in the chat that are kind of preempting some of the things we're going to talk about. Juan says, for example, is it a physical thing? It seemed like Inter spent most of the game chasing the ball. I think a combination of the age issue, the physicality, these are all things that we'll talk about in a bit more depth later on in the show. But I also think as you talk us through the goals that happen, we're gonna start to see those things be exposed, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think what PSG did really well with against Inter is that they recognised the things that Inter do so well, and they used them against them. So a couple of things I want to talk about. One is that we know that Inter play with this back five, but often it will end up not being a back five at all. So you have the flexibility for generally like your wing back jumping up high, knowing that you're then leaving a back four behind you. The other thing that you can do, That's an unintentional line, I'm sorry. The other thing you can do is have your centre backs stepping out as well. This is something that we saw in the Manchester City Champions League final when, with City you have players like Kevin De Bruyne who love to operate in that half space. When you have a back five, you can have your centre back stepping up, and you know that you can then still have a back four behind you. And I think the way that PSG caused them problems were they were able to do two things. One was they were able to exploit these moments when the centre backs are stepping up or the full backs are stepping up, and find the space in behind. But the other thing they did was they were able to actually pull Inter's backline right across and create space on the far side. So a lot of those goals came from
so often early on in the game, didn't it?
Yeah, and I think before we even get to the goals, I think what's really interesting is that, like most of this season, what we've seen is that for PSG, what they like to do is they like to have these sort of non-negotiable positions. So you're always going to have players in certain slots. So we've talked about this before, actually, but the analyst Callum Saunders has called these anchors and floaters, and I've added the line pinners in there as well. So the anchors, generally speaking, PSG end up with this back three of three centre backs, or two centre backs and the full back as a sort of back line here. They're going to stick there, and they're going to give you rest defence, right? So they're non-negotiable. Doesn't matter who's in these slots, as long as there's someone in there. Now, usually...
And then Achraf Hakimi plays at false nine, right? Is that
yeah, that's it. Well, plays everywhere. But generally speaking, they've used him as a pinner on one side, and then you'll have...
and when you say a pinner, what do you mean? Like he holds the opposition fullback back?
So when you have your two wide players here, what this is doing is it's forcing... generally one of these defensive line to come out. That then is creating more space around the middle.
Yeah.
So again, you'll often see them with these three here, two wide players. Usually it's usually Vitinha actually rather than Neves in this position. Vitinha in front again, so that gives you nice build-up angles, but also another bit of coverage. And then you have these floater players in the middle who have a little bit more freedom. They can move in, they can interchange, they can do different things. Vitinha and João Neves have very similar sort of profiles. Doué also, so you can often see them just switching positions. It makes it harder for the opposition to actually mark them. But what we saw that I think was really interesting in this game is that the two fullbacks, so Mendes and Hakimi, were pushing super high into and inverting it into this kind of area. And I think the reason they were doing that is because they wanted to start causing problems to the opposition back line, because as soon as you have Hakimi coming in here, DeMarco's probably a little bit nervous. Like, who am I marking here? You're getting two players in these potential back post areas.
Yeah.
And so what you can then do is you can both exploit through overloads in these areas, but you can also, if you can squeeze opponents back, you can then cause problems.
Well, and DeMarco had a really tricky first half, right? He was substituted at half time. And so another thing worth saying is that Inter then were forced into some more backline substitutions as the game went on, although the game was probably already away from them by that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just have a look at that in practice for the first goal. So for the first goal, what ends up happening is that Inter, who are playing from right to left here, they've had the ball, and because they have this age disadvantage that we talked about, they rely on very specific players to do a lot of the athletic work. So one of those players is Denzel Dumfries, who we've circled here. So Dumfries is the wing back here, but he's almost playing as a striker. He's the one who's trying to get high up the pitch to cause problems. So if they get the ball through, then they've got an option to play around the opposition defence. What that means is that the back line has now become it's become essentially a back three with the two wing backs out of position. Kvaratskhelia then is able to exploit this. Let's move the game on. Denzel Dumfries still high in this position. Here's Kvaratskhelia. If you can find the ball into this area, suddenly what you're doing is you're starting to reduce the back four that's there and make it harder and harder for them to do anything. You've got the two players here that are going to come in to this side, dragging their players with them, until you get to a point where what you're doing then is you're pulling all of the players into this area of the pitch, right? So here's the two far side centre-backs. Pavard is over here. You can see Dumfries has got back, but at this point they're basically playing as a back four, and you can see that the way that PSG is playing is that they've dragged that defensive line over. The ball then comes back out, and then we see that other aspect that I was talking about, that when you have this flexible back line, you have players like Acerbi who are happy to step out. So in this situation, he sees there's danger here, and he thinks, right, I'm the one who's got to deal with it. and that opens up space which Doué immediately clocks.
Yeah.
So that the ball goes out, Acerbi goes out, Doué's already looking for the space in behind.
This happens. Is this the goal where Dembele turns him, or was that later as well? Because the same thing happened with Acerbi later on, right?
Yeah, that happens later, and I've got the slides to show that, so
Right.
we can have a look at this. But yeah, Vitinha then plays the ball into that spot because the Acerbi stepped up. Doué just is able to receive the ball. It takes obviously a fantastic touch to make
And a
it
fantastic
usable.
pass as well.
Yeah, exactly. But at this point now, you can see there's an overload at this back post. That's what we were talking about before. We've got Hakimi underlapping into that space. DeMarco is with him. And when we get to the actual point at which Doué is able to pass the ball to Hakimi, who then plays it into the box. I've drawn the line here. This is the halfway line if you're looking at the pitch sideways.
Yeah.
I'm not
You
describing that
split the
very
pitch
well,
in half there.
split the
Yeah.
pitch
And
in
you
half.
love drawing lines, don't you?
I do,
John?
yeah.
Sometimes,
lines are
Mark, I'll
great.
come into the office and John will just be drawing lines around the office, even just on walls, you know?
Really?
I'll be like, oh look, half of the office is in you know
On
the
this
wrong,
side
yeah,
of the
exactly,
line,
yeah.
and the other half is on
But
the
what you
other
can
side
see
of the
here,
line.
before you obviously derail the conversation, the whole of the Inter team now is on the ball side half, and what we've created is free players on the other side as well. So again, using those sorts of principles, drag the opponents over onto one side of the pitch, switch it to the other, and this is the second goal. The same thing happens. This is from a fast break, a quick attack, but the same principle happens as well. You have a couple of players making runs on the diagonal to pull players with them. So you've got Fabian Ruiz here pulling DeMarco with him. That leaves Desiree Doué free. The ball comes into the back post, and then with a little bit of luck, they score. But again, the same kind of principles, using the ideas that Inter have that make them so good as a defensive force, but actually turning them on their head and being like, we're going to use this to our advantage. And then, as you mentioned, that third goal, when Desiree Doué scores, and what we have here is Dembele pulling Acerbi out. Actually, interestingly, at this point, we can see the rest of the PSG team have dropped really deep, and it's dragged the Inter line forward, so that the three centre-backs have become isolated. They're man-to-man against the back line. And what's happened is that Dembele receives the ball, Acerbi has stepped up to him, and this kind of thing always reminds me of the line that Roberto De Zerbi uses, which is when you're playing against an aggressive press, you should always try and play against the grain of that press. And what he means by that is, when a team is pressing, they're always trying to force you into the area where they want you to be.
Yeah.
So the best place to try and be is the area where they're coming from, because that's where the area where they're forcing you away from. This is a great example of that, because Acerbi is forcing Dembele this way. Where's the most dangerous area? Well, obviously the space that he's opened out. He's able to drag the ball back. You've got a runner coming through in the form of Vitinha, and then you end up in this situation where you're now 3v2 against two centre-backs with runners. You're going to get punished.
They caught Inter's defenders in momentum movements quite regularly as well. I feel like they used their own momentum against them and switched the play really quickly, didn't they?
And that's how you play well against a team like Inter. So a really good match plan from Luis Enrique. This PSG team is a joy to watch. Really, really a pleasure to watch. But the reason why they're a pleasure to watch, I think, is because they're so well drilled that they're able to be free. It's really nice watching that he's got them so well drilled that they know what to do almost instinctively. They're not running set routines, but they know, oh, well, if someone's gone here, then space is here. If this player's from the opposition is stepping up, there's the space behind them, and they know how to create free players in those areas and access those free men as well. So, yeah, a real joy to watch them.
Just a note on Hakimi as well. I think it's his fourth goal in the Champions League, which is the third highest among the PSG players in the Champions League, which, when you think about the attacking talent that they've got, is quite ludicrous. And just how much he does come into those central areas, because he scored similarly against Arsenal and Aston Villa from more central areas rather than back post. And you're absolutely right in everything you showed there as well, John, but he does like those kind of underlapping runs in general. He was popping up on the last line at times and making those kind of out to in runs where he just arrives in and around the box. So I think that's quite common with Hakimi, and it was just surprising for all the tactical reasons that you showed were incredible there, John. Just surprises me that Inter Milan having a back five, you'd think that they'd have full coverage, even when PSG's fullbacks get forward, that they still have coverage to at least have at least one man, but to have an overload on the back post of 2v1 shows that Inter Milan were just pulled apart.
There's a lot of love for Vitinha in the chat as well, as someone who repeatedly, broke Inter's attempts to press. He had a good game, didn't he, Mark?
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I think so. I looked at it before this game. It's probably still the case that I think he's made the most passes of any player in the whole of the Champions League this season. And one of the things that I love about him, and he did it in this game as well, was just his ability to just completely dictate the play, but also just receive it in areas where you shouldn't be that comfortable to receive it. He's just so good at evading pressure, and then obviously, like John spoke about before, the dominoes fall elsewhere because of the player's ability to get out of spots that they shouldn't otherwise do. So his ability, was it him as well who was the one who was running with the ball for this third goal? I think it was.
Exactly.
So his ability to, I think it's one of those like coaching techniques of kind of see it, do it. If you see the space to run into it. If there's no option, you need to pass it, do that as well. But he just makes sure that every time he has the opportunity to make the right decision, he does. So I think he's been fantastic.
I use the see it, do it philosophy a lot myself, but generally it's when I've just opened the fridge. It's a bit of a shame. We may have covered some of this already, Mark, but when someone like me, a layman, watches a game like this, I'm often struck afterwards, I wonder, were the winning team just really, really good, or were the losing team quite bad? Because I know Inter have been very impressive defensively, sort of up until the semi-finals when they conceded a number of goals against Barcelona. I have a statistic here that says Inter conceded just one open play goal in their opening 10 games in the tournament. So we know that they can defend really well. Were they particularly bad today, or were PSG just, more than a match for what they can offer tactically?
I don't know whether I'm bailing on the answer here, but I do think it was a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And I think that probably one links into the other as well. I think that at times Inter Milan were really poor on the ball, but I think it speaks to the athleticism of PSG off the ball as much as anything, and on the ball they're able to rest and defend on the ball so well. So I think that PSG maybe forced Inter Milan into making decisions that they wouldn't otherwise do. And I think that we were speaking about it during the game as well, that even when PSG were able to kind of cheat a little bit out of possession, maybe push a little bit higher, because of Inter Milan's athleticism, or I don't want to say a lack of athleticism, because of course they have, they are strong athletically, but just compared to PSG's pace, I think that at the elite level, when these margins are so thin, that you can just maximise that, and PSG just had the speed to be able to take a few risks and force Inter Milan into situations or sequences that they wouldn't want to do.
It's interesting you say that, and I do want to ask about the athleticism involved here. Obviously, we've talked about the fact that Inter were, on average, one of the oldest teams in the tournament. PSG are one of the youngest. It was quite interesting sitting there watching the game with you guys. Firstly, because every time there was a goal and I wanted to enjoy the celebration, you immediately go back and watch it and rewatch it 3 times. It's a very interesting experience of watching a game. But secondly, because there was a lot of live commentary, usually of where Hakimi was at any given time, or how one of the PSG's fullbacks was in a position that you kept saying seemed very risky, John. But we were having a conversation during the game that said, based on what Inter are able to offer on the counter-attack, it's maybe a risk that was probably intentionally taken by PSG?
Yeah, we were talking particularly about their out-of-possession approach then, so when Inter were building up from the back, because what ends up happening is that, I should probably have drawn this on before, but Hakimi jumps right up onto DiMarco in those moments to go man-to-man, because they want to go man-to-man across the front line, and that means one of their fullbacks has to jump up. And what we actually saw quite a lot from Inter was trying to find ways of accessing Lautaro Martinez directly. So you essentially want to get the ball to DiMarco, who can then play the ball into Martinez, or you maybe flick it to Mkhitaryan and then hit this space in behind Hakimi, because it's such an aggressive positioning. But the few times where that kind of thing happened, it was just incredible to see how Hakimi could actually get back into those into defensive situations quick enough to be able to actually defend them well. And I think this is something that you guys were talking about a little bit in your preview.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it sort of descends from Dembele initially being the one to, Liam Tharn was the one who identified this, split the pitch in half, make sure that he's shepherding Sommer or Bastoni, whoever's taking the goal kick, onto that side. And I was going to ask you, John, do you think that's because of DiMarco compared to Denzel Dumfries? Would they prefer to have it that side, because the outlet being Denzel Dumfries on the other side, if they force it to that side, he can win more aerial battles, I'd argue, and he's a bit more pacey in behind. That is it that PSG wanted it to be on that side of the pitch? Well, it seemed like it was because
Yeah.
it happened more often than not. It was that side of the pitch, and you take your risks more on that side, knowing the strengths of the players who are going to be the ones to win the ball.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to what we were talking about before with athleticism. Generally speaking, the left-hand side of Inter is less athletic than the right-hand side, right? So you've talked about Dumfries, but generally Thuram is on that side as well. And the second half they brought on Bishek for a little bit before he got injured. Again, they can overload like the athleticism on that side. It becomes, you've got Mkhitaryan and Çalhanoğlu on the other side. If you can force the ball onto this side of the pitch and then go jump man to man, then what's the risk? The risk is that you isolate Marquinhos, which they did a few times, but I don't think that Martinez is necessarily a player who's going to have the physicality to actually cause problems to Marquinhos. So I think they were happy to risk this jump of Hakimi right up onto DeMarco, isolate here, and then hopefully win second balls and have one of your centre mids helping out as well.
Now, John, I wouldn't normally ask you one of these questions because I know you hate to answer them, but given that we're on a live stream and you have to, I'm going to read this comment to you from VC Osmin 10, whose comment simply says, "No talking about the mental part?" ? And then they do this emoji, quizzical. What do you think?
The mental part, I think, comes under the category of game state that we talked about, right? Which is,
sure.
And we talked about this a lot, even actually when we were watching the game. I said it a few times when I was like, details are starting to slip.
Yeah.
When Inter get to 2-0 or 3-0 down, suddenly what you start seeing is like, so for the Kvaratskhelia goal, you see the back three just completely open.
The distances between them.
Like miles and miles of distance, and then you have, was it Kvaratskhelia who was here, right? So the ball comes in to Kvaratskhelia here, and Acerbi in this situation is just, he's had plenty of time from the turnover in this kind of area to actually get tight on Kvaratskhelia. He doesn't. The ball is played into Kvaratskhelia, and then it's just a race between a much quicker player. So I think when people talk about mentality, what they want is they want to talk about wanting it more, believing more. But like, all of these players are elite athletes. They all want it more. They all believe in it more.
They all hone their mindset also to not be drawn as easily by those sorts of negative internal narratives. Right?
Yeah, exactly. You don't get to that level if you don't do that. But I think when it starts hitting in these kind of games is when you're a team like Inter and the plan is we keep this really tight the whole time. Yeah. You give away a goal and then suddenly you're like, in 12 minutes, like you say, and suddenly you're like, okay, the game plan has gone out of the window. You concede more and more goals. Suddenly, where Acerbi at the beginning, if it were in a drawing game state, would be like, right, tight on Kvaratskhelia. He isn't, and that's where it starts slipping in.
Well, I was going to say, and maybe I'll ask you this, Mark, as well, because I do think if you play in this Inter team, it's 12 minutes in, you can see the first goal. You know that the first game plan is sort of out of the window a little bit, and you're moving on to stage 2, and then you can see a second goal in the first half. It reminded me a little bit of, and I know in the intervening time there have been strong Champions League final performances, but I remember in 2009 and 2011 when Barcelona and Manchester United met each other in those 2 years. Both times I remember watching them and thinking, if I was a Manchester United player here, I feel in the first half that the game is over and I'm simply playing to be less embarrassed by the end of the game, because it just has that feeling that it's going nowhere. I mean, I think even in this game, even after the first goal, I just think, is the game over already? In some ways, it ended up being fun that it was 5 goals that gave us something a bit more to talk about, the fact that it was the most dominant. Otherwise, in some ways, it was almost boring how one-sided it was, even if these players are elite, elite players who have incredible sporting mentality. It must get to them at half-time. They must be in the dressing room thinking, this is over, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I don't want to be disrespectful to Inter Milan because of everything they've done this season, but I think I said it in the second half that when Thuram was winning fouls, and any of them when they were having a long ball and just winning fouls and getting set pieces, getting the odd corner, in a Champions League final, I was like, that feels like it's their best way of scoring. They've been strong from set pieces this season in general, but it did seem like when you're saying that they don't really have any threat. They looked quite blunt in attack. That the only way that they could maybe score was from winning a foul and getting everyone upfield. It felt almost disrespectful, as though they were a bit of a minnow. But that probably goes to show everything that you're saying, was that PSG were just so dominant. And I don't know whether it's because, and I think this is an interesting point as well in general. Again, you can reverse engineer the narrative that Inter had to go to the final game, the final day of the Serie A season. They had to be as concentrated as they possibly could be. You wonder whether they were just, going back to the mentality and the physicality, as well as their age profile that we've already spoken about, kind of exhausted, and they were just kind of going at full tilt, and it's maybe one game too far. PSG were able to rotate. Of course, they had the Coupe de France recently as well, but they dominated that. That they were able to rotate, well, they have been for weeks in the French league, that they were able to sort of stay as fresh as possible as well. So I suppose that does maybe feed into it. Again, had it been the opposite outcome, you'd have said that they were staying on full tilt and able to actually be match fit and match sharp had Inter won. But I do think that there was an extent to which they were just gassed out across the season.
4 players there who are over 30 at the end of a very long season in a sport that has become increasingly physical. I think it makes sense that they've dropped off. And I think, if Inter managed to not give away that first goal, score the first goal themselves, it's probably a very different game. Even though,
it would be, because it would have been a different game. So again, that's a really good true point, John.
But I think in this instance, the difference is that then Inter can sit in, right, and then it's a question of like how well do PSG break them down. I suspect they probably would have broken them down, but there's a world out there where they score a goal, they hold on to that 1-0 win, and they're the Champions League winners. That's how football goes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's a fun comment from Plus 12 Gaming. Kvaratskhelia running back to defend even at 4-0 up. Is this what 20 determination in Football Manager looks like? I feel like there were a number of PSG players that had really, really, spectacular strong performances. Let's talk about their squad a little bit now, because as we've mentioned several times, they're very, very young, John. I mean, do you think when you watch this performance, this is a team that's going to get better next year, better the year after? Is this just the beginning of this kind of, I guess, post-Mbappe, PSG, Luis Enrique era? Or is this already kind of a peak? Are they required to be as young as they are in order to play the style of football that they're playing?
Well, I think to jump on the Kvaratskhelia comment to start off with, we've talked a lot about like athleticism, etc. in modern football, but weirdly enough, I think you might hold PSG up as being the team that are like it's a crude distinction, but technicality over athleticism. That's in part because I think we struggle to talk about athleticism in a lot of respects. A lot of these players who are quite small, João Neves, for example, like a supremely athletic player. Same with Vitinha. These guys are able to do what they do because they have an incredible level of athleticism. Often that kind of athleticism doesn't translate into the out of possession side of the game. And I think what PSG have done...
Why is that?
Because I think that, like when people say physicality, they mean bigness, right? Sure. They mean like big physicality.
I can push you off the ball.
Right, exactly. And I think when it comes to the defensive side of the game, like having the height advantage generally is advantageous. Yeah. So the fact that like Vitinha and Neves are very small space technical players who can change direction quite quickly, etc. Desiree Doué similarly, etc. When that comes to defending, those sorts of advantages don't really exist as defensive advantages.
Sure.
So, we've gone through that, and it's interesting that you mentioned the post-Mbappe era, right? Because I think Mbappe is another great example of a player who has incredible athleticism and technical ability, and usually that has translated in the Galacticos era as, well, I do the attacking bits, and the rest of the team do the defensive bits. The only way that this PSG team works is because the players like Kvaratskhelia and the other midfielders, they all doss in and help out the rest of the team. There was a few nice examples, I think, of the few times that Inter got forward in dangerous situations where so many of that PSG team are then dropped. They're doing the box defending. They're doing all of the details well. Their defensive, their backline behaviour stuff is really, really good. And I think that's what's so impressive about this team is that Luis Enrique has taken a team of like, and it's almost offensive us being like, well, there was the Galacticos era and now there's this era, because these guys are incredible. Now you would consider a lot of these guys to be Galacticos players. But what differentiates them is the fact that they are willing to, the game is not just about them. The game is about the team as well. And I think that's a really hard balance to strike as a coach, to get the players to be able to behave in a way that gets the most out of them as individuals, but also doesn't then just... And this is the modern question of our time about football, right? It's like, on the one hand you've got Pep Guardiola and he imposes these systems on players, etc. And I think it's a crude distinction. And then on the other hand you have this sort of groundswell moving towards this idea of like just let the players do what they do best, right? Generally speaking, meaning just let them dribble or attack or whatever.
Yeah.
you've got to get that balance right. You've got to get the balance between having the system there so that you are able to make the players greater than the sum of their parts without curtailing these guys' abilities to an extent that they're not able to do the things that make them really good.
Yes.
And I think Luis Enrique he's absolutely nailed that with this team.
I feel like there's a parenting analogy in there somewhere, you know,
Yeah,
a tale as old as time. That was a very big and impressive philosophical thought, Mark.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a really, really stupid and small question now. Would this PSG team win the Premier League? Hey, this is The Athletic, by the way. I'm Joe. Would this PSG team win the Premier League?
I could try and answer that philosophically as well. It's a really good question.
No, it's not, but thank you.
No, but it is an interesting question. I mean,
because they struggled a bit against Liverpool, they struggled a bit against Aston Villa, as you said already. I know the Champions League firstly, it's got different teams in it, so it's a different prospect, and also it's tournament football, so it is very different from league football. But I'd be so curious to see them in a league environment that was a bit more challenging than Liga.
Yeah, I mean, without ducking the question, I do think that, as I've done a couple of times already, I do think that the extent to which they can mix up their game as well, they're not one-dimensional. I mean, John's explained it really clearly there, but their ability to press really high and lock on and make sure they win the ball high up is a really incredible thing that they can do out possession. But I think in possession, I likened it to Arne Slot's Liverpool earlier. Their ability, again, probably due to their athleticism, but also their technicality, their ability to mix up their style depending on I suppose at times the opponent, but also the game state, what the situation dictates, is that they can go really direct, as we saw for the second goal, and play that counter-attacking football when the space is there to be exploited, but also they can get their foot on the ball and have long sequences of possession. We've seen it in the Champions League. For the preview, I showed that they had comfortably the most direct attacks, even per 90 minutes, accounting for minutes played, most direct attacks as a proxy of counter-attacking play in the Champions League. So they're able to spring forward in those transitional moments. But they were among the highest teams for the number of 9+ sequences of possession, 9+ passes in terms of the sequences of possession as well. So they're able to hold on to it for long periods when the situation dictates it. And they're also able to go direct when the situation dictates it as well, which Liverpool did to great effect this season as well. So in a league, they've obviously shown in the French league that they can be dominant across the course of a season. I do think that same sort of skill set tactically would hold up in the Premier League as well, to have multiple strings to your bow, if you like.
Okay, let's talk one last time about Inter, who, as we've mentioned, their team's pretty old. I feel as though some of those players are going to, start to retire in the next few years. Many of the squad were also present for Inter at the last Champions League final that they made it to. Was it 2-3 years ago? 2 years ago. Yeah. 2 years ago. And also we know that actually under Inzaghi, the team have made a profit in recent times. But they have bought quite a lot of aging players as well. So I feel like that team is about to disperse. Maybe this was the sort of final time that we saw them all together. So question number one, try and duck these, Mark Carey. What does that mean for this Inter team? Also, what does this result mean for Serie A, if it means anything, at a time when we note that there have already been quite a lot of managerial changes at some, in the top 10, maybe some more to come as well?
I feel like I do want to duck both of those, but I'm still going to answer it in a roundabout way, that I do think it is impressive that Inter have reached the stage that they have of being so competitive in the league and the Champions League in recent seasons.
Yeah, over a sustained period of time.
Over a sustained period of time, and I read something from Neil Shalat recently, who outlined, I think since 2021, that a third of their signings have been aged over 30, which is quite a big proportion considering, but I think it's been born out of circumstance because of their financial difficulties as well. So I think you'd comfortably say that's not a sustainable model or anything that they probably ideally do, but it's the situation that sort of dictated it. So I don't think that this is something that they're going to be wanting to do long term, but I do still think, for all that we have probably bashed into Milan a little bit in this video, that I do think that it's really impressive what they've done with the age profile that they've had, and the fact that they've been forced to balance the books in recent seasons and be quite smart with their signings, knowing that it has to be cost effective as possible to then still eke out 2 Champions League finals and going so far in the Italian league as well. I do think it's obviously worth giving them credit for everything that they've done.
Well, don't worry, Mark, because it wasn't just us that have bashed Milan into. I think also PSG did in the game. So that was fine.
I was just going to say that like a couple of months ago, Inter were on for winning a treble, right? And they've ended up winning nothing. And I think again,
Can you say nothing again, but with even more emphasis on the nothing?
nothing. Yeah, they've won nothing, and it shows that they've had the ability to go deep in 3 tournaments. But then when it's come to the end of the season, as we've said, they are having to rely on older technical players, which I think to a degree has given them advantage in certain ways. But when it's actually come down to the final stretch, they've not been able to do it. And the other thing to say is that I think Inter have comfortably been the best team in Serie A for the last 6 seasons or so. But they've not won the league every season. It's actually been a bit of a merry-go-round for winners. And in part, I think that's because Inter aren't able to take the advantage that they have and translate it into financial advantage and then buy better and better players. If they had, I think they would have. There's an argument to be made. They would have been almost dynastic during this period. So again, it's an incredible amount of praise should go to Simone Inzaghi for achieving what he's done. I mean, you mentioned that they made profit. They made 100 million profit over the course that he's been at the club, which is the most that any Serie A team has made in that same period.
Also very unusual for an elite team of Inter's nature.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at the actual breakdown of it, it's the teams, it's the Brightons and the Brentfords of the league that you see down at making that kind of profit. The teams like AC Milan and Juventus have lost over 150 million, if not more, I think, in Milan's case. So the very fact that they're able to compete at the top of the league with that as a condition is hugely impressive. And Simone Inzaghi, I think, is potentially moving on soon. I think he probably feels as though he's done as much as he can with a team where those are the financial realities. But I think it's made Serie A a more exciting league as a result. But I think in any other league, what would have happened in those conditions is that they would have just ended up with Inter just becoming the hands and away dominant team during that period. So the fact that they've not actually won a Champions League for it, despite making 2 finals in 3 seasons, is a huge shame. And it's a shame that it ends in this way. They took that Manchester City team, won the treble all the way in that in the last final they were in. They've deserved a Champions League trophy off the back of that, but
sure.
Again, I've said it before, that's football.
That is football. You can always feel sorry for the players, as we did at the end of the game. They came a long way this season, but they fell pretty hard at the final hurdle. 2 quick-fire questions before I let you go this evening. The first, I'll come to you, Mark Carey. The first is, has the new Champions League format been a success? By which, of course, I mean the new format with one 36-team group at the beginning. Much the same, sort of, more recently. But what do you think about the format overall? Was it a success? Did you enjoy it?
I found the league phase quite hard to follow. I think typically you look at the groups in a typical group stage and you think maybe 2 or 3 you kind of want to have a bit more of a watchful eye over. I think we were speaking about this before, weren't we, John, that there was certain games or certain periods throughout the league phase where you just weren't quite sure how much peril there was on the league phase.
And it's worth saying you're a data scientist, so if you find it hard to follow, then that's trouble, isn't it?
Exactly. And the fact that often the cream does still rise to the top. That I made a point fairly recently that of the quarter-finalists this year, I think 6 of the quarter-finalists were also in the quarter-final last year. So for all that we can have different approaches, different models of it, often you will still get the best teams competing for these trophies. So not that it's a redundant question, but I do still think that it's not exactly going to make the minnows of the Champions League be the ones to get into the knockout phases.
What do you think? Yes or no? Did you like it?
This was about getting more games for UEFA, right? Yeah. So I quite liked the format because I quite liked the mix, like having everyone playing different teams. There's nothing worse than having a team like Real Madrid playing 2 teams twice, where pretty much the outcome before you start, whereas this mixed things up a little bit more. I think I would prefer it more if it was still just 6 games in the group stages, so 36 team group.
Yeah.
36 team group.
Yeah, but you only play 6 games, don't have those extra games in it, frees up a little bit more space for other things.
Does it dilute things though? If you do have, because I really enjoyed seeing more kind of heavyweight clashes in the league phase, but does it dilute then the quality that you essentially, we said it multiple times during the league phase, like this could be a final in itself, this could be a knockout game, and it was
that is true, because something fun about the World Cup, for example, is that you spend those first 2 weeks sort of anticipating and imagining the matchups that you might see later on.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's an extent to which you can just get sort of dreary with the idea that you're going to see maybe Real Madrid, Barcelona, whoever it may be, often You want that to sort of have enough rarity that it actually becomes exciting.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made for that. But then at the same time, as we were saying before, there was a situation where City and PSG were in the same sort of situation right at the end of the group. Right? There was a possibility that PSG might even drop out, having had a fairly poor league stage for most of it. But then they got through, and then they've ended up going and winning it. Whereas City didn't make it through. Well, they did make it through, didn't they? But they got knocked out in the next knockout round. So I guess there are sort of more interesting stories towards the end of that period, when usually most of the exciting stories are earlier on in the group stages, when it's like, because you get to midway through the group stages and everyone sort of knows roughly where everyone's going to finish. So maybe it drags out the enjoyment a little bit more.
That's right, viewers. That is how we do quickfire.
I was going to say quickfire.
At The Athletic. Everything's a little longer. Because you've stolen a quickfire from me, I'm adding one more in that's come from the audience. But it is quickfire, okay? So I want, in this first question, I want yes or no. If it's yes, you may elaborate briefly. If it's no, there's no need for elaboration.
I'm just going to say yes.
Okay? Now, this has been mentioned a few times in the chat here. But the way I'll phrase the question is like this. Does the result of this game change anything about the Ballon d'Or?
Oof.
No, and I'm not just saying that. I don't think it will.
Okay, that's a no from Mark Carey. What do you think?
I mean, I don't care about the Ballon d'Or.
I know you don't care, but quick fire.
No.
That's the easiest way of getting around
What would it change?
Well, it might change who would win.
Well, I guess. So,
I think there's only one thing it would change.
Yeah, but as in, like, who are the favourites?
Well, there were some shouts in the chat for Ousmane Dembele.
It's Rafinha and Yamal, they're saying. So are they saying that
Could Dembele sort of slide into proceedings a little bit there because of this?
I mean, I don't know how the voting works these days. I suspect probably not. I think Yamal should probably win. There's someone else at random that people are talking
Scott
about.
Scott McTominay, I think, is probably the other big name on the list. I'd love to see Scotty Too Hotty winning the Ballon d'Or. Yeah. Okay, and final quickfire question before we go. Just one name of a team, please. And I ask you this question, coming to you first, John, so you have to actually be quickfire. Which team, based on what you know about their squads now and where they're sort of tactically evolving so far, which team is going to win the Champions League next season? Now, I can tell you, if JJ Bull was here, he would say Real Madrid, because he loves to say Real Madrid as an answer to that question. But you seem like you might already have an answer, Mark Carey.
I'd say Barcelona, I think, given what you just said in terms of the quality they have up front, but their aggressive style out of possession as well, their technicians in midfield. I do think that they're just so entertaining to watch. They do leave the back door open at times, but I think Barcelona would have a big say next year.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting answer, because I feel as though, like, PSG and Barcelona, there's lots about both of those teams that are really commendable right now. It's interesting that Barcelona, who I think everyone just had nailed on getting to the final, maybe had the slightly easier run through to the final, and yet, Hansi Flick rides variance, and I think he's an incredible manager, and I think that it works, and he has the players to do that, and it's completely laudable to do that. But every once in a while they trip up, and when that happens, then you drop out. Whereas I think what's so great about this PSG team is that they've shown that they can change things up depending on the opponent. They don't have one way of playing that you live or die by. We will tweak things to make it work. So I'll say PSG. Nice. But I do agree with you. Barcelona, this Barcelona team, it's a matter of time until they win a Champions League.
But I do agree with you. The variance can play against you.
Oh, look at us. We all agree with one another.
We've done so much agreeing that we forgot to mention my incredible tactical observation.
Please, yeah.
Would you like to say what it was,
No,
John?
I think you should say it.
I'd quite like to hear you say it.
I think that this is a really, really good observation by Joe. This is like top tier analytic.
Well, let me tell you, I had front row seats the other day, because we did the Tifo podcast live at the Soho Theatre in Walthamstow, and I sat on the stage watching you do your 10-15 minute presentation to the audience of how you watch football, how you analyse it. You talked a lot about familiarising and noticing. Now, I'm not very familiar with either Inter or PSG, and I tend not to notice anything except how hungry I am during the day. But I did notice, as I was chatting with Mark Carey, you'd actually gone to the loo at this moment in time.
It's true.
Kvaratskhelia breaks through, scores, it's the fourth goal, and I noticed that almost all of the goals, and indeed all the shots that PSG took, were at the near post. And I wondered, I said to you, Mark Carey, is it possible that they're targeting somewhere at the near post? And you said, that's a great observation. I'm going to write it in my Athletic piece and claim that it was mine.
You heard it here first.
There you go. Well, that's me, guys. I'm a true football analyst. So I'm so good at this. But thanks for joining us. Thanks to Mark Carey.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks to John Mackenzie. Thanks to Alex and Don in the background over there. And stick around on the FC YouTube channel where we've got loads of sensible transfers videos coming up over the next few weeks. And indeed, we'll be back over the summer with more football.